Good evening, I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. There are several things we are looking into tonight. The 38th Asia-Pacific Roundtable, how can ASEAN navigate the diplomatic tightrope? We also have the latest from our correspondent at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. All that and more coming up on AWANI International. As geopolitical competition intensifies, countries across the Asia-Pacific are navigating how to minimize being caught in the middle. For ASEAN, principles of consensus and non-interference are increasingly tested amid shifting power dynamics. Astro AWANI correspondent Fei Kwan brings us more from the 38th Asia-Pacific Roundtable.
I'm here at the 38th Asia-Pacific Roundtable in Kuala Lumpur, where this year's theme is Recalibrating Asia's Frontiers. Now, this is what makes it a space really for exchange and reflection into the forces shaping our region. Joining me today here at the Asia-Pacific Roundtable is Prof. Dr. Muhammad Faiz Abdullah, the 2025 Chair of the ASEAN ISIS Network, as well as Chairman of ISIS Malaysia. Dr. Prof, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure having you on. Now, firstly, when we speak about within the ASEAN context, consensus and non-interference is really the key principles to the bloc. But these principles themselves are also sometimes seen as the roadblocks when responding to crisis. So now, in line with this year's APR's theme of recalibrating Asia's frontiers, what do you think? How can mechanisms like Track 2 diplomacy and the APR itself help ASEAN respond more effectively without compromising those values?
Yep, well, it's a very great question. The thing that we got to figure out, first of all, when we talk about Track 2 diplomacy, this is where the ASEAN, as well as the Asia-Pacific Roundtable comes into the picture, is that first we provide the alternative pathways in terms of giving the avenue for the articulation of views which may not be seen to be suitable or appropriate at the formal level. What I mean by that is that in order to foster creative innovation in thinking, new ideas, policy branding, this is where the Track 2 diplomacy, in this case the Asia-Pacific Roundtable, gives the forum for practitioners and experts to be able to voice out of the box and away from the confines of a formal ASEAN discourse. So that's quite crucial. Secondly, you're looking at the issue about in relation particularly to getting out of the constraints of views which may be tied, say, to the government. So each representative or player within the think tanks that comprise and come forward to participate in the Asia-Pacific Roundtable are entitled to express their own views. Even in the case of ISIS Malaysia, even though formally we report to the government in the sense of the structure, we are autonomous in being able to express and articulate our own position vis-a-vis what we see would be the best thing that could happen for ASEAN. That is the point I would like to make across. And finally, also you have to bear in mind that within ASEAN itself, there are structural limitations, both in terms of size and both in terms of the way things go about. Here, APR, Track 2 diplomacy discourses allow for a more vibrant discourse without having to worry about what the official position is. I think that's up to that.
And not having to worry about walking that tightrope between global powers. But when we look at Asia-Pacific, the region itself is a large, very strategically located and economically significant region. And especially in today's increasingly polarized world, what's going on with US-China tensions, how important is it then for this region to kind of lead in its own multilateral efforts and strengthen self-reliance rather than depending on those major powers?
Well, we have to accept when we talk about this region, if you're referring to the Asia-Pacific, the major powers themselves are a constituent part of this. So it could be a bit misleading to say how we could break away from there. Having said that, though, within this particular entity, you have huge areas in terms of economic entities. You have the RCEP, you have the CPTPP, and you have the various formations across. What happens is that the smaller countries, apart from the major power, are able to articulate themselves in the way as represented by, in this classic case, ASEAN member states themselves, to show that there are specific areas which are germane to ASEAN member states where they can articulate with cohesion and with centrality. So this itself is a counterpoint against the so-called prevailing powers, or the problems in terms of rivalry and conflict between the, well, we don't have to name the elephants in the room, that will be causing a certain level of uneasiness if it's separated from the discourse. I'll give you a classic example in relation to the South China Sea issue. Are we going to be prescribed by the limitations and, of course, the constraints between these two great powers when ASEAN articulates a specific position? No. This is where the ability to be cohesive and the need to conform to ASEAN centrality is key to advancing a cohesive view, and also particularly to articulate both in action and in speech.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your insights and taking the time to speak to me, Datuk Prof. Faiz. That's all I have for today. Stay tuned for more coverage on Astro AWANI on the 38th Asia-Pacific Roundtable. Back to you in the studio.
At St. Petersburg International Economic Forum 2025, innovation is more than just a theme. It's a statement of intent. From artificial intelligence to space exploration and sustainable mobility, Russia is using the forum to showcase its technological ambitions. Reporting from St. Petersburg, Astro AWANI's lead editor, Najib Aruf, brings us closer to the vision and voices behind Russia's innovation push.
Thank you, Studio. Of course, innovation is not just a buzzword. It's a battlefield for global influence, growth, and also survival. And right here in St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, SPIEF 2025, is turning that battlefield into action and also showcase right here in St. Petersburg. At the heart of it all is the innovation space, and which is the high voltage zone where startups, scientists, and also investors, and as well as futurists converge from AI to biotech, and also to space tech and green mobility, and also putting Russia where Russia is basically pitching its vision for a smarter and also faster and more connected future. Let's hear from the head of Recongress Foundation's Department for Relations with the Innovation Center, Dmitry Strykov.
Да, спасибо за вопрос. Традиционно мы поддерживаем компании по искусственному интеллекту, по e-commerce, и у нас сейчас планируется большой новый проект по e-commerce с Почты России. Буквально там через час планируем большое подписание. Также интересные проекты про электромобильность. У нас в компании есть продукт по заправкам для электрокаров. Вот сейчас вот 3 направления, которые мы развиваем.
And of course, that is just the day 0, which is today. Tomorrow is the day 1, and there's going to be a lot of coverage from St. Petersburg International Economic Forum 2025 on AWANI International. Back to the studio.
After the break, we hear about opinions on what Malaysia could do in the ongoing Iran-Israel conflict. Stay tuned.
Kelimomo datang lagi? Mungkin shampoo anda tidak 100%. Mari kita lihat. Gunalah Head & Shoulders menghilangkan kelimomo sehingga 100%, membasmi kegatalan, melindungi kulit kepala sehingga 48 jam supaya kelimomo dan kegatalan tidak datang lagi. Head & Shoulders.
Alami penstreaman serba baharu bersama Max. Kini dengan Astro Box baharu.
Awesome!
Bukan sekadar filem. Itulah kami. Serta rakan-rakan.
Hello, lovers.
Melangkaui kebiasaan.
Michael versus a white shark. I'll accept the challenge.
Nikmati kehidupan sepenuhnya.
It's smelling incredible. That's delicious.
Segalanya di sini.
Let's get this party started!
Tawaran masa terhad. Pelanggan Astro. Add-on Max dan jimat 50% untuk 12 bulan di My Astro. Max, stream terbaik dengan Astro.
While Malaysia may not have the military capacity to assist Iran in their ongoing conflict against Israel, there are other ways the country could help. In an interview with Russia Today, Emory Research founder Dr. Rais Hussein Muhammad Arif said one of the ways Malaysia can help is through diplomatic means.
I think Malaysia possibly can help through diplomatic positioning, not so much as a force projection, as you are very well aware of Malaysia being the size of the country and the size of the military that we have. But more importantly, our Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim have clearly indicated the support for Iran in terms of self-defense capabilities. And also, we must not forget that Iran already demonstrated its military superiority. We see how, despite Israel's access to NATO alliance, air support, US satellite intelligence, and joint interception systems, Iran managed to penetrate Israel's defense with missiles and drone swarms, struck strategic infrastructure targets, issued direct warnings to civilians while avoiding maximum civilian harm. I think what Malaysia can do and must do is to be a narrative ally, a conventional ally, who can shift the global discourse away from Western propaganda and toward lawful, multipolar truth-telling. So the real battlefield now is diplomatic, not kinetic, and Malaysia is well positioned to lead from that front.
Now, this week on Wu Says, we take a closer look at China's economic growth numbers. Critics ask, is it the end of China's miracle? Melissa Idris discussed this with Professor Emeritus Dr. Wu Wing Tai.
Well, I do not think it will be the end of the China miracle unless China makes some very serious mistakes. First of all, we have to remember that the Chinese economy grew at over 10% a year from 1970 up to 2012. It is unrealistic to expect that the country could continue to grow at 10% a year for the next 30 years, for the simple reason that a large part of the growth occurs because China started out very far from the global frontier of technology. So China started with a very backward level of technology, and when it opened up, it entered the global market of technology. So it's able to buy technology, look at what other people have done, and they have drawn the correct lessons and went ahead, and it grew at 10% a year for the first almost 30 years. That has to slow down, largely because as you get closer and closer to the global technological frontier, your gap is not so big anymore. So everything you do is have less of a bang than before.
Yes.
So which is why in 2014, when Xi Jinping came to power, he pronounced that China has entered into a new normal. The new normal means a growth of roughly 7%, down from the 10. But what we have seen in recent years is much lower than 7%. 2023, 2024, it is less than 5.5. So it is unnaturally low. And the IMF has predicted that 2025 will be less than 4%. So I do think that China is been growing below potential from ever since around 2018, largely, and it could easily grow back at 6%.
Catch the full conversation of this on all AWANI International social media accounts at Power Affairs.
That report wraps up AWANI International tonight. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more. Be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thank you for watching. Good night.